Up. Today we've got Elizabeth Rogliani. She's here. You may recognize her. If you haven't seen her before, she was in a viral video this last week where she came out to warn people about their experience in Venezuela and how America is facing a similar problem and how you should be concerned by sort of the beginning steps towards what could eventually happen. So I want to welcome Elizabeth to the show. Thank you for coming on with us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So this will make a lot of sense in context for people who watch the clipped version of the show, because we're going to go ahead and put your video so people can see it and get sort of the warning you gave. But for the people who haven't seen the video, can you sort of rehash your story and the warning you're trying to send to Americans?
Sure. So I'm Venezuelan. I grew up there, born and raised. I saw a lot of similarities. I've seen a lot of parallels between what's happening now, the movements that are sort of wreaking havoc in the United States right now, and how they are similar to what we had and what destroyed our country. The only difference being in that those groups that are not in power right now are just political movements. Here in the United States, for us, they were already in the government. So I am a little bit worried that these groups will gain momentum and will actually get to political power.
Right. What were some of the first signs that made you draw those parallels in your mind and, perked your ears to what was going on around us in America?
It's hard to pinpoint the first signs, but for most recently, I guess it would be the knocking down of the Columbus statue, which I know here, I didn't realize the United States, so many people had this idea of Columbus, like this, he was a horrible man, when he never even came to the United States. One of the first statues that came down in Venezuela was of Columbus. And why is that? Because he was sort of the symbol of the Europe and America coming together, the discovery of America. And that is something that they wanted to get rid of. That was something that they wanted to reject. And then after that, of course, street names, they changed a lot of the street names in Venezuela to something more, I would say, indigenous or native, which you would think, oh, that's all right, that's a nice thing. But when you take into account the message that these groups are bringing, like the fact that they are openly saying they're Marxist, or the one of the leaders of the movement has gone to Venezuela and expressed a friendship to the Venezuelan government. Yeah. All of that put together, recipe for disaster in my mind.
Right. How did that affect, your family members? Do you have any stories that you could tell us of, moments where they knew that their, livelihoods were starting to slip away?
Yeah, I was very young when all this started happening, but even though I was young, I remember how heightened the political environment was then. I was only about 7 or 8 when Chavez got elected, but even then I was aware of what was going on. I think the first sign was when they started firing people from our national oil industry. Suddenly Chavez decided that no one that worked there, he wanted to keep them on. So he fired people that had been working there for 30, 20 years without their going away package. So basically what was intended was that these people would retire, or even if they were fired, they would take away some money that they had accumulated by working there. That was all gone. And then a lot of people, thousands of people went to protest, and they were met with fire with snipers on the rooftops in April 2001, I think. But even before then, my family did not like this person. I do have one uncle that voted for him because he was more of a liberal at heart. He really wanted the message of Chavez originally was very level-headed. He wanted to bring the poor out of poverty because he said he loved the poor. So that touched a lot of people, right? But he also used certain groups sort of as tools, I would say now, in hindsight, I can think about it this way. He used the indigenous population of Venezuela as a way to kind of say they're being mistreated, we need to be better, All these people over here are to blame for, what happened to the indigenous population. So he blamed the European colonizers. He blamed anyone that was somewhat of a descendant of Europeans in Venezuela. So that division started really early on, kind of separating people by class and by color of skin, which granted is somewhat different in Venezuela because the majority of the population is already mixed race, but he would still kind of try to find a division. Like the people with the lighter skins were to blame, and then the indigenous were the victims. And then, of course, also class warfare was a big part of it. Like everyone, and their insults towards the opposition, they called us escuálidos. So that, to me, the polarization of the country was somewhat of a similar thing that I've been seeing here.
Yeah,
Right,
I was going to say, not only there are parallels to America right now, but it's something that you mentioned in your video that went viral. As you said, the Cubans tried to warn us Venezuelans, and there's so many parallels to what happened in Cuba. And I think that the greatest thing we can do as people who are Americans, is try to warn our fellow Americans. And that's why we do what we're doing. And I think that's why you made your video, is we're trying to warn people in America how quickly this can happen. People think that right now it's just some angry kids that don't know their history and they're pulling a statue down. They don't realize these are very well-funded groups. These are very well organized, and they're using young people as basically, little pawns in their game. But there are chess masters behind those pawns, and there are people who have this really well planned out in terms of how you topple each sort of thing until you get to the king, until you can get to that end run and get checkmate. So, I think that if anybody watching gets anything out of this, like the number one thing I could tell you is be aware of what's actually happening. This is a planned, coordinated event in time, not just one statue. It's a whole long-term picture of a different vision of America that some people with a lot of power and a lot of money on the left have for America and for the world. And that's why these things have happened previously in Cuba and Venezuela. And it's why we have such terrible regimes in places like China where, human rights abuses go completely unnoticed. So if we want to save the last beacon of freedom, because if America falls, everything falls. If we want to save freedom for the next century, for the next generation and generation after that, people now need to be very aware that there's a 2% part of our population that's very loud right now. The other 98% cannot be indifferent, or else we're going to end up ruled by the 2% who are very loud. Little things like McDonald's putting Black Lives Matter stuff on their social media profile seems like not a big deal. But it actually is a big deal, things like that, because they've conflated the idea that Black Lives Matter with a Marxist organization. So these are the things that everyday average people need to call out around the water cooler. They need to call out to their local officials and say, look, I'm not going to be used to emotionally manipulate the rest of my community. Of course, I love Black people. I love everybody. But I don't love this organization. Their founder is an avowed Marxist, and their goal is to completely dismantle our system. And it's my job to defend America. And I think that the best way people can do that is on a local level. What do you think? What's the best way people can fight back against this?
I think one of the best ways for me is having actually conversations with people. Most conservatives right now are afraid to have those hard conversations with their friends, and they're sort of hiding. So everyone else thinks, okay, so we're the majority. People want this to happen. People, because the voices of the more moderates or conservatives are not being heard, or they're just quiet because they're afraid of being bullied. But you have to think about the repercussions of you staying quiet will be much greater than just maybe a couple of trolls, a few people insulting you online. That's all gonna pass. If we allow these people to get into power, and you think, oh no, the United States, the separation of power, I mean, we already saw it during Obama. Obviously, there is some corruption in the government. It can happen here. We had that in imagination that, oh, Cubans, they had a dictatorship before. You know, their system was very different. We already know our freedom. We're gonna let them go this far, but we never imagined it was gonna go for 20 years. Even when we were under the Chavista regime, we thought this is not gonna go for long because we already understand what freedom is like. But after a while, you start normalizing things, right? Even 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, the idea of defunding the police would have been crazy extremist, but now it's mainstream. So now you can't say, oh, this is not going to happen here. You see these ideas popping up like they're fringe and suddenly taking so much strength that they become mainstream. The mayors are talking about defunding the police in New York. That's happening in Minneapolis. That happens. I mean, to say it's all fringe, it's not going to come to the mainstream. It's obviously naive because we're seeing that happen right now in real time. So the first thing is talking to people, voting, and locally voting is important because it's not just the highest office, it's also the states, right? Because the states that have the most problem right now, look at who the mayors are. And they're always blaming everyone, all of their problems on the president, which makes no sense to me. Voting and education is very important because people have been indoctrinated for far too long about these crazy ideas. I went to college here in the United States, and even I, a person that was already lived through this crazy left sensation, I'll say, I was pulled a little bit to the left. Even having my experiences, I was pulled to the left. So imagine someone that doesn't have that experience, that is disassociated from the rest of the world, has lived a very comfortable life, then have all these professors tell you certain things, you're more susceptible to it. And I'm not saying I was poor, I was living a horrible life in Venezuela. No. And thankfully, because of that, I was able to come here and I was able to leave that behind. But people that were really struggling in Venezuela, they don't have time to be speaking to anybody about it. That's the thing. So you can't discount people's opinions based on whatever, their color of their skin, their socioeconomic background. It makes no sense.
Yep, and I think that it's really interesting that in every one of these cases, race was really used as a motivator for division. It happened in Cuba, same thing, where, you know, the number one thing I get told on a regular basis as a Cuban American is, well, you know, I feel so bad for your family got their slaves taken, because that's the idea that people on the left here in America have, is that every Cuban who left Cuba had slaves. My family didn't have slaves.
Yeah.
I don't know any, to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever met any Cuban family that had slaves in Cuba. I think I would struggle to find one. So, you know,
I think
this
you would
wasn't
have
like
to be
a
a vampire.
yeah, it wasn't like a super prevalent thing in Cuba either. So, you know, like I'm sure it existed, you know, historically you can find, you know, context that yes, it existed, but on a very small scale. So it's kind of a weird thing that for some reason the left here in America has been educated to think that there was this mass slavery epidemic in Cuba, and that Castro and Che were like these like figures of, you know, racial, you know, beautification and unification to fix all of the, you know, broken chains of slavery in Cuba or something. Like, I don't know where they got this idea, but again, like you said, it's about education. There's just been this terrible miseducation of communism and socialism in America. And I think a good example of that is like, if anybody watching has kids, ask them about Mao, ask them about Castro, ask them about Chavez, ask them about these historical figures in the past and say, what do you know about them? What have you been taught about them in school? Because I know myself, just recently, for our oldest daughter, she had a Spanish class where they had a poster of Che Guevara on the wall, you know, in like a position of respect and honor, you know, and it just blows my mind that we have things like that going on in school, while at the same time having people say that they want to tear down, you know, like statues of abolitionists and Union generals, like people like Ulysses S. Grant, who literally fought to free the slaves. And we're trying to get rid of his statue. But at the same time, in schools, we're celebrating Karl Marx. We're putting posters up of Che Guevara. You know, so I don't think that people need to play super nice and PC with all of this. I think people need to call out the hypocrisy, because the truth is this whole movement is filled with hypocrisy. On one hand, tearing down statues of abolitionists and people who fought to free slaves, while on the other hand, celebrating mass murderers. I mean, just go to any one of these rallies and look around for Chase shirts, and you'll find Chase shirts at any one of these rallies.
Right.
That's one thing you can count on with the left. Doesn't matter what they're protesting. If you go out there, you'll find somebody who has a beard and a Chase shirt.
Even in gay pride parades, where they literally, wanted to murder gays. They did murder gays.
Blows my mind, honestly. And
they had no idea who he actually was. If you said, hey, what were his views on gay people? They would have no idea what he actually believed about gay people. They have like this weird education that apparently has come from seeing other leftists wear the shirts with his face on it.
Don't they have a Che Cafe at one of these colleges in California?
Yeah, they do.
I can't remember what college.
Cafe.
Yes.
There's a Che Cafe at a university in, I want to say it's California.
Yeah.
He's a raging homophobe, by the way.
Yeah.
I can't believe it.
Wire, I think, sent somebody there to
Or
outside.
PragerU.
No, it was PragerU. You're right.
Yeah.
PragerU sent a cameraman there asking people, hey, what do you know about Che? And these kids knew nothing.
They're miseducated.
They knew nothing at all.
I think that's the biggest thing that we should be concerned about is, we focused on culture, we focused on what's happening now, but we fail to recognize the root cause of what is still continuing unchecked right now is education. What's happening to our kids in school right now is they're not learning history. They're learning Marxist washed history, baked in political agendas, and we're not stepping up and fighting. We're not stepping up and stopping it. And we think that we're safe in private schools. I'm telling you, you're not. Your kids are not safe in private schools. Yeah. We've been through all of this, and it's sad that we're at this point now where, I mean, we have to really evaluate our options. In your perspective, Elizabeth, what do you think we can do? I mean, as Americans, when our education system is fundamentally broken?
Well, I mean, my opinion, it's very important to preserve the nuclear family. I've been thinking about this a lot because I've noticed all of these movements that are coming from specifically one side are going after history, and they're also very much anti-religion and anti-family, right? The feminist movement is part of that. The idea that women should be single and that is the best way to spend their lives. I know that seems like a radical statement, but I hear it all the time. I've seen articles, so many articles posted by mainstream news media talking about canceling men in general, and how I don't understand how the logic here. Don't you see that you are overcorrecting too much? And then think about an article that came out saying cancel all women. I mean, there's an impulse obviously to get rid of the nuclear family. Even the whole idea that we live in a society that gender is construction, a societal construct, is, I think, part of that, to kind of create this androgynous society where men and women are the same thing, and then you get children from a store or a place that you adopt them, not necessarily have them yourself. So two women raising a child. And listen, I'm not against gay marriage at all. That's not what I'm saying here. My problem is with the demonization of men and traditional family roles.
Yep.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, I agree totally. I think that you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, if you just look back at really problems in America and where they're rooted, if you look at a lot of the problems in, say, the Black community, a lot of it's rooted in the fact that the nuclear family in the Black community was attacked. It was politically attacked, economically attacked. It was attacked in many different ways. And I would actually make the argument that the greatest systemic racism we've seen in modern times is the attack on the nuclear family within the Black community, to sort of downgrade and degrade the role of a father and a mother together, and the role of healthy relationships. Those things are like our greatest economic predictors for couples. You know, if you're married and you have children and, you know, you have all these things, you know, you get educated and all those things, every one of those little puzzle pieces ends up making you more likely to be more successful in life. So, I think that's something that we have to be cognizant of when we're talking about like how can we find solutions to make America a more prosperous place, a more fair place for everybody, is by really standing up for those values. And I think it's sort of an interesting time because of COVID, because now we're in this time, like we were just talking about this today with schools, like no parents really know what's going to happen this coming school year. And we're all sort of in this weird position where you kind of have to have multiple plans, because some parents don't agree with forcing kids to basically be prisoners for 10 hours a day, where they have to stay in a tiny area. They're not allowed to go out and play. They're not allowed to eat in the cafeteria. They have to
talk to their
stay at
friends,
their desk all day.
social distance from their friends.
Or on the flip side, I've heard others talking about, oh, kids should be doing PE while wearing masks, and like that's something that I think that there's no science proving that that's a safe thing for kids to be doing.
Yeah.
Like a lot of this stuff just isn't tested. But, so parents kind of have to have multiple plans for what they're going to do. And I think that we've already seen during this whole COVID thing, during the end of the last school year, a lot of parents got an awakening on the education their kids were getting and were very disappointed with it. So parents are already searching for what's the right answer, what's the right way to educate. And I think it's interesting that this whole thing is happening with the BLM movement at the same time that the education of children is being disrupted in a really serious way that has made kids seek out the internet and things like that. Because, a lot of kids are searching for their education on YouTube, on Google. And again, when you go to big tech, same problem there. The left owns those pillars of society. Like today, if our kid wants to do a cookie, they want to do a cookie project, and we say, okay, yeah, you can look up a cookie recipe on Google. Well, guess what? At the top of the page, there's a Google thing that if the kid clicks just a tiny bit too high, they're going to get the history of, I forget the lady's name. It's like a trans something history. So like if, you tell your 7-year-old that they can look up a cookie recipe, instead they're going to get the backstory on a trans movement. And to be honest with you, like it's not Google's job to put that for, just anybody. Like people should be able to search that out 100%. It's parents' jobs to educate their kids on those things. And as a parent, I'm not going to neglect to educate my kids on any one of these subjects that they're going to have to face as an adult, but it's on our time and our way. It's not, this isn't something that should be, being imposed on people by Google or by your TV provider. And you see it more and more seeping into every part of our society. Like if you want to turn on Boss Baby on the TV, a cartoon for your kids, well, guess what? You're going to get a screen like inviting your kid to check out the new Pride playlist.
And they have rainbows and it's colorful. And our kid was asked multiple times to watch these really inappropriate shows.
Our 3-year-old is like, oh, I want to see that because there's rainbows and fun stuff. And it like looks very inviting to kids. And here's the thing, again, just like you, I'm fine with gay people getting married. It doesn't bother me at all. I've been an advocate of saying, you know what, the government has no place telling adults they can't marry another adult. But at the same time, I also believe that these institutions that sort of are our pillars of culture and all these, tech companies and everything, I don't think they have a place trying to inject values into our kids. They went from being service providers to believing that they had the right to educate children. I think that that's where a line got crossed.
Right.
Because, as much as they're free to do that, we need to acknowledge our own freedom to have a response to that. And that's where we're at now, is that people with a conscience that want to protect their kids need to rise up and use their voice, because if they don't, we've lost.
Yeah, 100%. And as you said before, there's a minority that's very loud. And that minority is the one that's moving things. The corporations are listening to them. The schools are listening to them because of the belief that, okay, people must believe this, so I'm going to capitulate to this, right?
Yep.
If moderate people or conservative people don't say anything, they just tolerate it because they don't see beyond it. They think it's just a superficial thing. This is not going to affect anything beyond, but you give them a little bit and they keep taking and taking and taking. The limit doesn't stop. They keep moving the line, right? And then in schools, I think the biggest thing is that parents actually have to speak back and say, you know what, I disagree that this is being taught. And it might take a concerted effort, like a bunch of parents getting together and having that conversation, because maybe they won't listen to one parent. But if schools think, you know, we're gonna get in trouble if we don't have these, you know, Che Guevara posters up because all these people are yelling at us and telling us we have to do it, they're gonna do it just because they don't want to stand up to the mob if there's no one backing them, you know. So I think it's important that people do speak up and do say, you know what, I disagree with this movement, because those little things that you're letting them get away with, they will keep going, and they until they have the knife over here to your throat, you know.
Right. I mean, I don't really know of an area that they haven't controlled yet. The minority, you know, percentage of these leftists do control academia. They control all of culture. I mean, what's happening in schools, and I think that maybe some people don't realize with Google, is Google partnered with our education system. They have deals with schools for Google Books, Google search engines in their libraries. They have, you know, merged together into the fabric of our education. So it's inescapable. It's another one, you know, it gets into that public utility argument. Our education system, you know, Google has already enmeshed itself. So it's not like, you know, you can just tell your kids, oh, don't use Google, because the teacher is telling your kids, use Google for your research project. Use what we use at school. They teach on these platforms on Google. So it's unavoidable. And it presents all these other issues, which parents are so inundated with so many different things, just trying to keep porn off their kids' computers, which is a real problem, that they can't even get to the Che Guevara issue or the, you know, the Hitler issue or whatever it is, you know, that they're whitewashing, you know, all of history, you know, with the leftism, you know, Marxist whitewashing, that is happening because parents are so inundated, and we're also just trying to survive at their jobs. Like it's very difficult. And I think it's not that people don't care. It's that they feel so overwhelmed with everything that they have to do right now, with education, parenting, and protecting their family, feeding their families. It's a lot. And, you know, the left doesn't let any crisis go to waste. How can you tell us about crisis? What does that mean for the people? What happens during times of crisis? How do the oppressors use crisis as an opportunity to further their agendas?
Well, I mean, right now, the most recent example is coronavirus has actually been great for the Venezuelan government. There is some sanctions that are sort of choking them out. And of course, they're blaming all of the troubles of Venezuela to the United States and their sanctions, which makes no sense to me because it was already in decline. But they've used coronavirus as a way to control the population even more, because now it is very hard to find gas, to sort of turn on your lights. Like you have to go through this whole process to go put gas in your car. You basically get like bingo numbers, and their justification is that you shouldn't be going out anyway because of coronavirus. They destroyed our oil industry completely destroyed from top to bottom, and now they're importing gas. And because of the sanctions, they're not letting the boats coming in from Iran. We didn't need boats 20 years ago from Iran. We could export the gasoline. So now the coronavirus is a perfect example of how the government uses crisis to sort of subvert the population and control. Okay, you guys can't go out. We need to protect ourselves. Don't leave your house. Don't go to work. Everything is fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we see that in Democrat-run states too.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yeah. It's forced submission in a way. You know, to prevent people from working, but it's okay to protest. Prevent small businesses from operating, but yet it's okay to go to Target. You know, there's so many inconsistencies here, and we're trying to rectify it, but we're also being desensitized, and we're being distracted with statues being torn down. I feel like it's an inundation, you know, with so much chaos that we don't even know what the next step is.
Do you feel
I'm
like
a little bit, yes, there's a lot going on. I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon. And what I'm worried about is what comes next, because it's not like they're going to let the riots gone, the riots have sort of calmed down, but they're still trying to knock down statues. And then they'll calm down and they'll do nothing. They'll do something else. And whatever happens in November, I do think that it will go wrong regardless. If Trump wins, they're gonna throw a tantrum like you've never seen in your life. And if he doesn't win, it might be calm, because it will be calm if he doesn't win. But they're start changing the laws, and that's what I'm really worried about. I'm not that worried about the tantrum they're gonna throw, because I know it's gonna come. But I'm worried about how they're gonna get into government and change the laws, because all these Democratic politicians are appeasing these rioters, these looters, the Marxist organization, and saying, you know what, you're totally free to do that. And eventually, you know, there's a great quote by Churchill, and he says, an appeaser is the one that feeds a crocodile, hoping it'll eat him last. So whatever, even if the Democrats don't believe in what the BLM movement is about, they will, because they'll get into into power and change everything. They already want to lower the voting age. They want to make DC a state. They want to have more illegals come in. For what? To have them dependent on the government for votes, right? I mean, that's what I'm worried about, because they will not let go of power. What they want is power. That's it. You know, they're not concerned in making this place a utopia. That's never going to happen. As utopia becomes a dystopia real fast. What they really want is power, period.
Yep, 100%. And, you know, what we've talked about before is, like, people lose sight of the fact that 10 years ago, this stuff sounded crazy. So, you know, you really have to think 10 years from now, what sounds crazy to us now? Because in 10 years, that's very likely where they're going to be.
Exactly.
And, you know, we don't even need to go 10 years in advance. You just go to, if Joe Biden wins, the Democrats win the Senate as well, and they have the House, they have the Senate and the presidency, the destruction they're going to be capable of doing is immense. Here's the difference between Republicans and Democrats on the elected level. Republicans still have this idea, a lot of Republicans do on the elected official side, that you have to sort of make sure the other side isn't too angry. On the left, though, with elected Democrats, they don't have those same concerns about crossing lines that hurt people or will cause too much of an uproar. If they need to flip the Supreme Court by adding 5 more seats, they'll do it. If they have the ability to do it, if they have the control to do it, they'll do it. And that's my main concern, is we would be, if that did happen, and I think you're right, what we've experienced coming up to this point is not the end of it. There's still much more to come. And let's say they get what they want and Trump doesn't win. We really will be facing something unprecedented in modern times that will leave us in a position where people are going to have to worry about, am I going to have my kids taken away from me for my political views? And, you know, all those things that we've seen in other countries, places like Cuba and Venezuela, where people's whole lives have been ruined by leftism. That's what people are facing here. And I don't think they realize how quickly it can happen, that this literally can happen in this same year. You know, that if in 2020 Biden wins and they take office in January, that by this time next year, you could be looking at a world where you don't have a job and your children are being, you know, they're attempting to take children away from people because of their political views. That's not crazy. Like, this is what has happened in other places. So I'm really, when I saw your video, I was so happy, because every time somebody else steps out and steps up and fights and says, you know what, you guys need to look at what's really happening here, it gives me a little bit of hope. And I hope that, you know, people, Americans that are watching this, that didn't have families come from communist or socialist countries, get that little bit of hope, but also a little bit of fire under them to be ready for what could be coming next, because people need to be prepared. And it's also why I hate that Trump uses the phrase silent majority, because we can't afford to be silent anymore. People need to speak up. It's silent majorities get people nowhere in a moment like this, in a crisis like this, with a movement that is so loud and so, rage fueled. If you don't have other people on the other side voicing their concerns, society as a whole, the indifferent people are going to assume that that small group has the support of everyone, and they're going to be silent. So people need to step up and use their voice.
I fully agree. And by the way, I didn't say this before, but these groups obviously have no regard for the law. They're breaking laws left and right. So you can't really expect them to respect the Constitution if they get into political office. I mean, they're already sort of the Democratic politicians in power are sort of being easy on them. They're not punishing the crimes that they're committing because they want their votes. They see them as their constituents, so they're gonna get their votes if they don't act to protect the law, right? So that just tells me everything I need to know about the Democrats that are not saying any word against the problems that are happening. But they want political power. So that's why they do it. They don't say anything against their constituents breaking the law, and that's what I would expect to see from a government that is ruled by Democrats, or this group specifically, that capitulates to the Marxist group and etc.
Right. I can't imagine where we'd be right now if we didn't have Trump in office, sending in the National Guard, threatening to have to intervene. There's so many of these Democratic leaders that are so willing to subvert the local police, defund them, restructurize them, putting in social workers, all of these nonsensical strategies that really just amount to control. That's the last step, really. I mean, if you weaponize law enforcement to be a political arm, then there is there's nothing left. And I think we've seen that, with every socialist end in history, that was the last thing to go, is the enforcers. So I think that we really need to pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what happened in Cuba really in this regard, but for us, they dismantled our police very early on. In 2001, they got rid of our police and put a new one in. It's not that they imagined, no one's going to commit crimes anymore, so we don't need the police. They put their police in.
Right. Right.
That's the same thing. They found a way to institute their own police in Cuba, and then treated the previous police like they were enemies of the state. And that's it's kind of they did similar things, during the Nazi reign in Germany, where what they did was they initially said, we're going to put you in the unified command under this control. That was step one. Step two was, we're going to have some of the SS join the police force. And then step three was that it had been totally infiltrated and re-educated and organized to actually carry out the atrocities of the Holocaust upon people. So it was, just those quick little jumps from one thing to the next. It's you're under my control, then it's you're under my complete command and you can't question me, and then it's I've re-educated you and you all are, total followers of my ideology. And that's how this always trends. And so in a place like Minneapolis, don't be surprised if in a couple of years what they have there is a police force filled with leftists that are called like the Public Protection Unit. And they're out there, more concerned with what you said on the internet than they are with somebody committing a murder, on the next block over. That shouldn't surprise you at all, because we've seen it in other places.
Yeah, sort of a thought police.
Yep.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the first time that happened. Right. In Venezuela, they have lists. They put you in a list.
Wow.
On undesirables.
Wow. Yeah, it only took a couple weeks before law enforcement officers were quitting or calling in with the blue flu. I mean, having stuff poisoned in their sandwiches and bleach in their milkshakes. I mean, our law enforcement officers need our support. That's another thing that we can do as conservatives is speak up and support our law enforcement, let them know that we appreciate what they're doing, the hard job they're doing. I mean, they're managing all of this, the race relations, the leftists,
they're bearing the brunt of all of it. Really,
yes, they're the punching bag for everything going on.
It doesn't just need to be conservatives. Like people who are in the middle, who watch this show, who maybe think I'm too conservative in one area or another, or whatever. Maybe you're a little more liberal on something, but you're just a level-headed, reasonable person. You can do things to support good law enforcement too. And I understand there's some bad cops. Okay, there's going to be bad people in every industry. Doesn't matter what the industry is. It can be in religion. There's pedophile priests. Okay, in this, you have some bad cops who abuse their power. In government, you have actually probably more than any other industry some bad people. in every industry, though, you have that. It doesn't matter what it is. And especially industries where there's power involved, you're going to have some corrupt, bad people. But, the conversation in that aspect can center more around what can we do to lessen that and to weed that out versus let's just destroy the institution. Because we've seen globally what those replacement efforts can look like, and they don't look good. They either turn totally totalitarian or they turn into a joke where you have police out there collecting butter knives off the side of the road saying that this is a dangerous weapon. And there's not really a middle ground. So we need to find that middle ground as people who are just reasonable, whether you're conservative or just center left, whatever it is, as long as you're able to still see that this is crazy. That defunding the police is crazy, that dismantling our institutions is crazy, that tearing down things that are, offensive or that you don't like is crazy, then do what you can to stand up for it. It doesn't matter which side you're on. It's not just conservative versus the left or whatever it is. It's just reasonable people versus unreasonable people. And we're fighting for freedom of things that there's statues I don't agree with that I still am like, you know what? It doesn't, you don't have the right to tear it down. Maybe it's recognizing a Democrat president who was a racist. That's fine. I don't want to tear it down. That's not my right to do. This is a part of our country's history, and it's something that we have to acknowledge, we have to live with. And you want something better, build something better. I would rather us as a country focus on building better monuments, building better statues in the future because of our success as a nation that's unified than focusing on looking backwards at the past. And if people would relate our country more to their interpersonal relationships, like how good has it been for any of us to look back in history and say, you know what, my ex-girlfriend, she cheated on me once, so I'm going to treat you differently because she treated it. That doesn't work for people, So why are we looking backwards as a nation at everything that happened previously, or looking at statues that maybe represent something that offends some people and saying, hey, let's focus some time on this instead of focusing on your future and your now, your present. None of us had anything to do with these statues. None of us had anything to do with slavery. None of us had anything to do with any of this. So why are we constantly looking backwards? And I think the answer to that is there's powerful people who would love to distract us. And it's part of an organized plan to bring down America. Because there's a lot of people, including China, who would love to see America not be the most powerful country. In fact, one of the things I've heard the most recently is people saying, hey, you know what? We need to divide into two countries. We need to have a blue country and a red country and just have a divorce. We need to divorce as a nation because we don't get along. We're just too different, blah, blah, blah. There is nothing that China would love more than for the U.S. to break up into two because, again, global domination for them would be so easy if the U.S. breaks into two. So all of these things are planned.
Joining with to become a superpower.
The left would join with China in a heartbeat, if that sort of scenario happens. So I guess it's just sort of to say we can't give up that easily. We do have to fight for our values and fight for our country. We can't just give it up.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and to touch on the statue thing, and it does seem like it's a distraction, but for me, it's also, first of all, I want to say I might not agree with all the statues. And I think if there's an argument to take them off, it should be a democratic process, not a minority of a mob deciding for everybody else. But there's the knocking down of most statues in general, not Stalin or anything, but U.S. grants, Junipero Serra in California, a Spanish missionary, the men who wrote the national anthem as well, many others. Yep. It's sort of to me, it's sort of an attempt to have a before and after, right? I think that we got rid of the U.S. got rid of the statues of King George when the revolution happened. Yep. So this is because that was then, right, when U.S. was a British colony. But then we came the new history, the new country. So getting rid of the statues of the U.S., to me, it sort of represents what comes next, the new U.S. And that, to me, is worrisome. I mean, for us in Venezuela, and also, again, I would love to hear how, if this worked in Cuba similarly, they took away in the curriculum of public schools, they took away Venezuelan history, that subject specifically, and they put another one in that sort of taught Venezuelan history as the before and after Chavez, sort of putting Chavez as a savior of our country, you know? And I think that sort of represents what we're seeing with statues, sort of taking them away. That way we can destroy the system and create a new one from scratch, sort of create a new country from scratch.
Yep, I'm glad you brought that up. Because during this primary election for the Democrats, Bernie Sanders brought up Cuban education, and he was touting the success of the Cuban literacy program, as he called it. And here's the truth about it. First of all, there were not a bunch of illiterate Cubans all over Cuba before Castro came there. It wasn't like there were a bunch of morons in caves that like didn't know how to form a sentence. Okay, there were very literate people who could read books. There was great poets. There was great writers, and so on and so forth. But what that really stood for is they changed the education system in Cuba. They destroyed everything that there was previously, and they replaced it with Marxist re-education, basically. So the kids that they touted as success stories were kids who were, you know, basically brainwashed into Marxism. And that's who they saw as the next generation take over. And that's why communism tends to have a longer shelf life in places like this than others, because in a place like this where it's contained, you know, like there's no bordering country for Cuba, they control everything there. And so the fact that there's nothing to argue with, that's just what life is in school. Every single one of your friends is not just receiving an education, they're receiving a political education. And there's nobody fighting back against it. That gives you a lot more freedom to screw up as a government and have people's lives, you know, objectively be terrible, but them still live with it. Because there's nothing competing with that ideology to tell them, no, this doesn't work. And so it's again, another parallel that if you now look in America at our schools, that's what they're attempting to do again. And I see too many complacent parents who, number one, either don't know what's being taught in school, or number two, are too nervous to say anything, or number three, are too embarrassed to say anything. And all of those things need to fly out the window. I don't know if it's a product of celebrity culture or what it is, but we have too many meek adults who are afraid to open their mouth and stand up for something. There's nothing more worthy of standing up for than our children's future. And so if you're too afraid or too embarrassed to ruffle some feathers so that your kid gets a good education and they're not indoctrinated with crazy stuff, then I don't know what to tell you, because you're going to lose your country. You're going to lose everything that you value and believe in, because what may seem like one step now is two steps later, and they will be knocking on your door eventually for everything that you care about, whether it's your religion, the way you practice your religion, the school that you want your kid to go to, whatever it is that you value, they will come for it. So I hope Americans get that, all Americans that don't have the background you and I have. I hope that they really get it through their heads over the coming weeks and months.
I agree. And when you were saying about Cuba not having any borders, so nothing to compare to, we thought the same thing. Cuba's an island; they don't have anything to compare to. Of course, we have Colombia, we have the United States right here. We would be in a very friendly relationship with the United States then, and so we didn't think it was going to be a problem for us. Our country is a lot more unsafe than Cuba, because it's easier to get guns to criminals because of the fact that we have borders.
Yep.
And the United States, to me, represents sort of this last beacon, even though there are other free countries in Europe. But if the United States were to fall under this socialist idea, it won't be long till other European countries sort of fall to the same thing. I mean, we're seeing the same in the UK. The same mirror effect is happening in the UK. Sort of this left and right fight. Immigrants in Sweden even saying that they built the country, that they deserve everything. And I'm not, again, I'm an immigrant. I can't be against it, but these ideas of leftism are being exported to other countries, and they're grabbing onto those ideas to sort of destroy those systems that welcome them, and make something new. So if it happens here, that's why I'm so worried. Where am I going to go? I mean, we're already seeing a socialist president in Spain. It won't be long till the left takes over in most European countries if it happens in the United States.
Yep, I agree 100%.
So
You know, we may have to, if everybody doesn't wake up and get it together, we may have to start like a conservative island somewhere and just bring all the good people with us, and we can form our own government.
Or go to Mars.
Or go to Mars with Elon Musk.
Yeah, I would have to go somewhere else with Elon Musk. Exactly.
Yeah. But thank you so much for joining us. And what we really need, I think, in 2022 is people like you and people like us to run for office. I think that you should think about that.
I don't know. This whole thing has been a little bit overwhelming. That video of mine going viral, I never expected that. I just wanted a platform where I could express my points of view, and this happened. But of course, I had other ideas for my life. But I think this year is very important that people speak up, that more people step up to the plate and say their opinions, because otherwise we're just going to get swallowed.
Yep.
And we'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I agree. I love that crocodile quote, by the way.
Oh, yeah, the Churchill quote. Yeah, and isn't there another quote too, just to end, the last little tidbit is, socialism has never been sold as this poisonous, toxic thing that ends up killing people. It's always been sold as virtuous. That's how people bought into these ideas. And I think that we really have to remember that it's virtue signalers, the virtue, people trying to act holier than thou. I know what's better for the poor people. I know what's better for the brown people. Pay attention, because that's exactly how socialism got enacted into these countries.
Exactly.
Yep. 1,000%. 1,000%. Thank you so much for coming on with us today.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
And keep doing what you're doing. Keep fighting. We need people like you to use their voice. You have a powerful voice.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
So thanks, guys, for watching today. I hope you had, this was an informative episode for you guys. It was a little crazy for us. So if we seemed a little off at the beginning, it was a little bit crazy today. We had to kind of like rush into this. So I'm very thankful that all of you stay with us and tune into all of these. We will be having Vernon Jones on this week. I think Thursday, right?
I think so.
I think Thursday. I'll post, because I'm going off memory here, but Vernon Jones, if you don't remember, he was the Democrat state senator in Georgia who flipped and is supporting Trump, and is writing a bill to make it a hate crime to discriminate against people for being Republicans. So I'll let you guys know the time for that episode. It should be a good one. And we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. All right, y'all. Be sure to like, share, all that good stuff. Help us reach everyone. Have a great day.